Hello, my name's Phil and I work for the Customer Services Department at the Hozelock head office in Birmingham. With over 50 years horticultural expertise, we at Hozelock understand the rewards of gardening and want to help you get the best from your garden. Before we start, you'll notice I'm wearing some protective gloves. These are because the pump has been in your garden pond, so we don't want you coming into contact with anything that's been in the water. So please make sure you wear gloves. You won't need any tools to do this operation, so we can just carry on with changing the pump. The first thing we need to do is to remove the motor from out of the cage. On the Titan range of pumps, there are 3 clips that you undo so that you can separate the top half from the bottom half. On the Cascade pumps, it's a slightly different method. You press down this little lever in the middle which lets you separate the 2 halves of the cage like so, and that will then reveal the actual motor that sits inside. Before we take the motor out, I'm just making a mental note of the orientation of the motor inside the cage so that when I come to put it back together again, I don't forget what goes where. And also note that the cable exits through a little cable exit hole in the case like so. If you need to, make a little sketch of where everything goes so that if you do forget, you can come back to it later. So the next thing we need to do is to take the motor from out of the filter cage, and we do that on the Cascade by just sliding it out like that and taking the motor out. Put the cage to one side for later. With the Titan range of pumps, you just undo 3 clips around the bottom of the cage, and then the top half of the cage lifts off and the motor then just lifts out. But again, make a mental note of where everything goes so that when you come to put the motor back inside the cage, you don't forget where it all goes. On this little Cascade pump, we're going to take the rotor from out of the body of the pump, and we do this by releasing and taking off the pump chamber, which is this part here with the little part that sticks out, which is the inlet. And if we just rotate it 90 degrees anti-clockwise like that, the chamber will lift off. And again, this is common across all of the range of Hozelock, Titan and Cascade pumps. It's the same operation. It's just the moulding shapes will vary slightly. With the pump chamber removed, you can then see the rotor. Some of them have got 6 blades, some of them have got 2 blades. Some of them are an enclosed rotor, you can't see the blades at all, but it's that part inside that we need to take out. So with the pump chamber removed, we can then lift the rotor out of the motor body, like so. Make sure that if any of the parts fall off that you retain them, but you should have a small bearing at each end of the shaft which the rotor rotates on, and some rotor assemblies have got a small bearing in between the end cap and the front of the rotor, so just make sure you retain all of those parts. Just make a visual check inside the bore of the motor just to make sure there's no pieces of debris, particles of sand or grit, anything like that. And if you do feel that the bore may need a cleaner, you can just do that with a piece of cloth or a tissue and remove any sediment that's in there. If you're going to replace the rotor with a new one, obviously take it out of the packet and make sure that you assemble it as it comes out of the packet. All the bearings and the rubber bushes will be already fitted when it goes into the packaging. If you are refitting an old rotor, just give it a visual check to make sure there's no subsequent damage or things that you need to be aware of. So we're now refitting the rotor back into the pump body. You'll find that when you get 3/4 of the way in, the magnetism will draw the rotor back into it fully, so you don't need to worry about where it's actually positioned. We're then going to refit the pump chamber onto the front of the pump body, making sure that we locate the bearing on the end of the shaft into this small hole in the middle of the pump chamber. So that's located the bearing on the end of the shaft. Push the pump chamber fully on so that it lies flush with the body, and then lock it in place by just giving it slightly less than 90 degree turn clockwise to lock it in place. You can then see that that's now fitted securely in place and there's no gaps around the joint of where the pump chamber joins the body. So that's the rotor taken out and put back in again and the pump chamber refitted. And to finish off the assembly on this cascade pump, we can then refit it back into the cage. It goes back in the reverse way it came out. So this is basically hooks in like that. It sits in place nice and firmly. Make sure the cable goes into the cable slot there so it doesn't get trapped. And clip the cage back together. That's it. Job done.